They really connected with their fan base in a way that no other boy band has really been able to.
It was them just sort of pacing around on stage.
They did so much more for the LGBTQ movement than any other boy band could have possibly done.
Welcome one, welcome all to ScreenRant's Challenge My Goats. My name is Liam Crowley, and I am your shepherd through this journey of superlatives as we crown some of the greatest topics in film, television, and now music history. I'm feeling a big time rush. I'm feeling in sync with my guests today. I'm feeling like we're going in one direction because we are declaring the greatest boy band of all time on today's show. Our expert today is ScreenRant staff writer Lacey Cohen. Lacey, welcome to the show. What makes you qualified to declare the greatest boy band of all time, and who is your pick?
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Super jazzed. It's funny. Boy bands and pop music are not really usually my area of expertise, with the sole exception of boy bands. When I was 11 years old, I actually realized I was gay. And at that point in time, I was outed before I was ready and devoted pretty much 100% of my energy towards going back into the closet. And I, just to say I'm good with it now. It's not a sensitive topic, but I thought that the best way to do that was to become an expert in all things boy band. I think that, teenage heartthrobs, like there's nothing straighter than falling in love with a sexy male musician at age 12. My first and one of very few boyfriends was Jesse McCartney. I then moved on to the Jonas Brothers, Justin Bieber, massive phases. And I was totally all encompassed in the fandoms. I was deep into Tumblr, the blogging and all that. And I guess that brings me to my pick. I think hands down the greatest boy band of all time, One Direction.
Okay. I'm glad we got this pick. That's news to me. I did not know this one going in. So glad to see One Direction is on the debate stage. Congratulations on also, embracing your identity here in 2025. That's a beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing that origin story with us. We have a pretty contentious challenger today, though. He's the senior music writer at Variety, Mr. Stephen J. Horowitz. Stephen, what makes you qualified to challenge Lacey's GOAT?
Well, I'm probably going to show my age, but I've been listening to boy bands since the TRL era. So I sort of grew up on the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and Britney, and I too was also closeted back then, but I also embraced pop music very openly, which should have been a pretty obvious flag. But, I was all up on the boy bands of that era. I went to Backstreet Boys' Black and Blue tour. I studied boy bands and pop music from the start. When I got into journalism many years ago, I started writing about boy bands. I've written about them extensively. I wrote One Direction and The Wanted's first Billboard cover story in 2012. Spent a lot of time with those guys and actually their parents too. I hung out with One Direction's parents. So up until now, I've been covering each iteration of boy bands, when Pretty Much and God, what was that other band? the one, it was Pretty Much and I'm totally blanking, but there was
what year? You got a year for me?
It was let me see. Hold on. Sorry.
5 Seconds of Summer.
That's who I was thinking.
No, it was later than that. It was
Why Don't We?
It was Why Don't We? I literally wrote a story about Why Don't We when they came out, and I couldn't even remember them. That just goes to show how boy bands have progressed over the years. So anyways, a long way of saying that I have been covering boy bands forever. I was at Justin Timberlake's show last year where NSYNC reunited for the first time in 13 years. I have been on the scene. I have seen it all. So I think that makes me qualified.
Wow, we got our first Why Don't We mention in the first couple of minutes of this podcast.
Yeah, it just took a lot of recall. It took a minute.
We got two experts here, both coming from different perspectives too. I love that there's the personal connection with Lacey. I love that, Stephen, you have a personal connection, but you also have decades of experience going through the different eras. I feel like in our debate today, we're going to have the opportunity to explore all the different eras of boy bands, how they've evolved, how they've changed, what they look like today. We'll start by laying our foundations. Lacey, you already revealed it. You got One Direction that you're bringing to the table. What makes One Direction the greatest boy band of all time? You have 2 minutes.
All right. Well, first and foremost, four of them are British, one is Irish. They've got the accents, they've got the sex appeal, they're all good looking, they all have style, even if it's cyclical and might not be in today. So they've got that down pat, I would say, more than anyone else. But their music is actually good. They're actually very, very talented vocalists, all of them. They know their range, they each have their niche, they each get equal time on each song. I think they really connected with their fan base in a way that no other boy band has really been able to. I remember being 12 years old and my friend group, we each had a different favorite, and we would obsess like during each song, karaoke, singing at the concerts, footage, everything. Each of us would kind of fangirl over our favorites verse or bridge or chorus or what have you, and there was never, it was very, very balanced, so that kind of gave them that appeal. We got to watch them grow up. I think they are definitely unique in that they started so young. That's not necessarily exclusive to them. Obviously there are a handful of boy bands who start off that young, but they really started from nothing. They showed up to compete on the X Factor individually, and I believe the youngest one, Harry Styles, I think he was 17 when he went on the X Factor, and Simon Cowell, I think you had to be 16 if I'm not mistaken, so he was really 1 year into eligibility, and Simon Cowell saw something in all of them, saw that they were talented, and saw that they could do more together than they could separately. And I guess that brings me to my next point, in that after breaking up, none of them really enjoyed nearly as much success with their solo careers as they did as a cohesive unit as One Direction. And that, that's I can wrap there.
You'll get more time in the actual debate. A very well thought out opening statement. I like what you brought to the table. Steven, 2 minutes to break mine and Lacey's heart. Why do you disagree?
Well, I disagree because I think One Direction was just an echo of what had already been done by boy bands before them. But I think it was sort of done to a lesser extent in regards to quality. When I think of One Direction, I don't think of a group of performers in terms of being full-fledged entertainers. I'm talking about when they performed, it was them just sort of pacing around on stage. I mean, social media did a lot of work for them. I've seen One Direction in concert back in the day. I've seen how they're just, it doesn't have the magnetism that I think a lot of the groups that came before them had. And not to mention that One Direction wouldn't even exist without the groups that came before them. They're just sort of like, they're in the lineage of what had already been done. And they struck at a time where there was an opening for them to happen. I think that's why their success happened at the scale that it did when they debuted in 2011, 2012. I think I can wrap there.
Okay, you brought good points to the table because you did mention how they are as entertainers. And I was like, whoa now. But in my head, I can't really think of iconic One Direction choreography. That's a very big point of boy bands. So, Steven, without further ado, let's kick off this debate. Who is your challenger pick? Who is your GOAT?
My GOAT is NSYNC. And
right.
there's a debate, obviously, that's been going on for decades over Backstreet Boys versus NSYNC. But I think you can make the argument, and I'm going to make it, that NSYNC was just better on the whole. I think they were better dancers. I think they were better singers. I think their songs were a lot stronger. And it felt like, and feels like, they're not necessarily a nostalgia act now in the same way that Backstreet Boys is. And when you're taking a look at legacy, you just don't have that same sort of sad feeling about NSYNC that you do about Backstreet Boys. Like when you look at the Sphere residency, which, like, no knock on Backstreet Boys, they're incredible. And they sold out tons of dates at the Sphere, but it's like, that's a lot of millennials in that audience. And that's a nostalgia act. And NSYNC isn't out here doing the same thing. I think that they cemented their legacy at the time that they did, doing it at the highest professional level, and it's echoed across generations. So I think that sums up my argument.
Wow, Lacey, he's not even talking about One Direction. He's just clarifying that NSYNC is better than Backstreet Boys. I can't let you, as a Directioner myself, take that. So what's your response?
You know what I will say, first and foremost, how I said that there was one boy band that I was not entirely prepared to defend One Direction above, and it was the Backstreet Boys. I think the Backstreet Boys are the only contender for greatest of all time aside from One Direction. So I guess I'll mic drop there, and then we can go on. But I mean, I guess I can also get more into it. I love Justin Timberlake, but I don't love NSYNC.
Okay, I see where you're going with this one. Before we get any further, we like to do this thing on Challenge My Goat called Nostalgia Temp Check, because sometimes our greatest of all times are blinded by smelling the roses when we were younger. We're blinded by our first experience, whether it be a great first time concert, and then after that it influenced how you listen to the music. Steven, I'll go to you first. What is your Nostalgia Temp Check for NSYNC? What was your first exposure to this band?
Oh, my first exposure. I mean, I'm an MTV kid for sure. So I was at home after school watching Total Request Live. I hope everyone on this debate has heard of that. That was basically the central focal point of pop culture in the late 90s and sort of stretching into the 2000s. And so my first exposure was when they started to break with their first hits here. They started overseas. They grinded in Europe. They were signed in Germany first. And then they came over to the States and signed with RCA and really started working the circuit here. So I was sort of on them from the start, only because of my proximity to pop culture on television.
You are like the equivalent of discovering someone on SoundCloud today, like with how you follow it.
Back in the day,
someone like that is a special feeling when you get an artist when it's like before they even have like 5,000 listeners on a streaming service, and all of a sudden they're in the millions. You're like, I knew them way back when. Lacey, for you, your nostalgia temp check with One Direction, and if you could also tell me your first song memory. Do you remember the first One Direction song you heard?
I do unfortunately think. Caveat, I do think it was What Makes You Beautiful, but I listened to Up All Night, like front to back before it was leaked. It wasn't even available yet. I listened to it illegally on Tumblr. So What Makes You Beautiful, but only because it's the first song on that album. So I guess that is my first exposure. I was in it. I didn't watch them on the X Factor, but I became familiar with them via Tumblr not long after. And obviously Up All Night was the biggest debut of my life. I'm not even going to lie. There's definitely some nostalgia with their early stuff. But what I will say is that I think their best album is 4, which is their 4th album. Funny enough, 4. And I don't really think there's a ton of nostalgia there. I was definitely out of my phase, my hetero closeted phase at that time. And I think I was really listening to their music, and still that's probably the album I listen to the most now. And I think it's solely on merit. I think that's a great album. I think it's musically sound, and it's a great album. So I think there's definitely admittedly some nostalgia there with One Direction and with their fans, but I also think that they are pretty high quality. They make good music.
I do remember the rollout for What Makes You Beautiful. It was like premiered on Nickelodeon. They had that whole like TV partnership. So it's hard to not have that be your first song because of how much it was drummed up. But still, I like that you mentioned, going through the full first album and understanding all the other catalog. Steven, for you, we already got your temp check. I need to know how important longevity is for you, because NSYNC as a band, I was around for a couple of years at the height of its popularity, and then solo careers happened. One Direction dominated the 2010s and felt like they were together for like triple, quadruple the time. Do you feel like NSYNC's relatively short time together as a band is enough to declare them the GOAT?
For sure. I mean, their impact in real time, which I'm older than both of you, but like it was so explosive and unavoidable. It literally became pop culture and it defined it. And you could look at the short window from 1997 when they put out their first record to 2001 when they put out their final record, and then compare it to all the time that came after it. It's like those songs that were on those records are so woven into the fabric of pop culture even now. Like, you can't go like a month without hearing an NSYNC song. I don't think you could say that for One Direction unless you're a fan who like goes back and listens to their records. They also had iconic records, like no knock on them. They were amazing. But look at the tailwind of One Direction now. It feels like kind of a distant memory. And I just don't feel like it has the legacy in the same way. And, you know, time is a very important part of that. Like, we don't know how important or impactful One Direction will be in 10 years. NSYNC has the advantage over that. But we could just say definitively that because that time period exists, that their legacy is longer. And I think that ties into them having a bigger impact.
Lacey, I need you to fight this legacy battle.
I gotta disagree. First and foremost, today, totally coincidental, I walked into the mall where my parents work, where I'm taking this call from, and in the mall, they're playing "Story of My Life." Totally, not even like pure coincidence. And "Story of My Life" I wouldn't even put that in their top 3 of like as far as scope of their hits. I would say it's definitely top 5, probably number 4 if I had to. I mean, I'm not really thinking that through yet, but their songs are still getting played. Their songs are still, you know, One Thing is still dominates at weddings and bar and bat mitzvahs. I'm sure quinceañeras, not that I've been to one recently, but I think, you know, there are a handful of NSYNC songs that you can say that about, but I don't think you would be able to pick out any random teenager today and say, name 3 NSYNC songs and have them be successful. I think if you were to do that with One Direction, any random teenager who probably, even kids that weren't even born at the height of One Direction, and they would be able to do that.
But that's recency bias too. Like, of course, people who are younger are going to know One Direction songs because they grew up listening to them, as opposed to not having grown up with NSYNC. I also, and I know I'm sort of taking the spotlight here, but I also think that NSYNC had the advantage of having a distinct sound that literally influenced the future of music. Like, you can hear how NSYNC did what they did and how it permeated through culture up until now. Like, you can listen to songs that are being put out by like Tate McRae, for instance, and you could find NSYNC sounds or tropes that existed way back then. I don't think you can say the same for One Direction, but again, that's a time thing. It may shift, but I do think that sound played a very important part of their legacy.
The Kid Laroi right now is trying to do the whole Justin Timberlake thing a little bit, and it's not Justin Timberlake's solo career. Like, he's wearing the bandana like he's JT from NSYNC. So I really like that perspective, Steven. Lacey, something that you know, for us young guys out here that always messes with me on Challenge My Goat is everyone always talks about the influence and like how influential is related to greatest of all time. But to me, I'm always like, well, what about the new school? Like, are we even able to have these debates without having time pass for both of these picks? So I want you to talk about One Direction's catalog in the 2010s, excluding influence from it, and just talk about it as its own individual entity. Why is that collection of songs with those music videos, with those outfits, with the limited choreography? They weren't much of a dancing band, but still, they did have a little bit of choreo. Why is that on its own worthy of being the greatest of all time right now in 2025?
Absolutely. I think innovation. I think NSYNC's music videos don't hold a candle to One Direction's. I think I don't think anyone's musical videos hold a candle to One Direction's. And I know I might get some flack for saying that, not growing up in the 90s, where music in the 80s, but I think One Direction's music videos were a spectacle. They were maybe not choreographed with dancing, but they were like a mini film. They told a story, every single one of them. I think, you know, when the music video came out for Best Song Ever, that was like that deserved an Oscar. That was such a great music video. And I think, yes, they were aided. They had social media and they had technology that bands of the 90s like NSYNC didn't have. And but I think that worked to their advantage. They used that and they ran with it. That's how they were able to become so big. When they really, like you were talking about, Liam, with the rollout for that What Makes You Beautiful, and with Nickelodeon, that episode on iCarly, like, I don't know anyone who was alive at that time, probably parents too, because of their kids, and they weren't watching that episode of iCarly when it rolled out. I think their music videos and their energy, just as young, excited, unjaded boys who were making music, is unmatched, and their lyrics are mature. They don't just sing about love and teenage lust. They sing about story of my life. Prime example. It's rooted in love and teenage lust, but it's a story of it tells a story of one's life. And same with the music video. They're going through Polaroids of growing up and their lives up until this point. And I really don't think that I don't think they needed to necessarily influence others who came after them, because they were such a cultural lexicon in and of themselves.
You want to talk about storytelling with lyrics? Shout out Night Changes, man. One of the greatest songs of all time, boy band aside, in music as a whole. That's near and dear to my heart. Steven, though, she's talking about music videos, and I know you're ready to talk about Bye 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 with those puppets.
I mean, is there anything else to discuss? You also have to think about, you're talking about, storytelling, right? Bye 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 is like it's a spectacle of a music video. I remember watching Making the Video, which was a show on MTV where they literally had cameras on the set and they followed the people on set and how they put everything together. And then at the end, they debuted the music video. That was like a cultural moment when they did that episode. I remember where I was watching that. But aside from that, Bye Bye Bye, the video is them as puppets. We all remember they do the dancing. We see them do all the things. And what gets lost in history is that was a commentary on their own trajectory. That entire era was about freeing themselves from their previous situation. I don't know if you guys know about the history of Lou Pearlman, and he's the guy who sort of put together Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. But after NSYNC put out their first record, they sued Lou Pearlman, claiming that he was taking more than 50% of what they had made, and it was unlawful. And then Lou countersued them for $150 million. It was a mess. They settled out of court. They cut ties with him. So not only do you have this music video that shows them as puppets, which is literally a metaphor for their situation, but it also shows them freeing themselves from that situation, as comical and like oversized as the video may be. But it really just spoke to their experience. And not only did they take that experience and use it, but they grew from it too. I think it was a true inflection point, and I think it was a really smart, artistic, and creative choice.
My favorite part about Challenge My Goat is I always learn something. Even on topics where I think I'm an expert, I had no idea that Bye 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 had that deeper layer to it in the music video. Thanks for sharing that, Steven. Lacey,
Sure.
we're gonna wrap before we get into our closing statements with one more topic that I really need to discuss, because with boy bands, a big thing is reunions. Obviously, One Direction, the elephant in the room. We sadly lost Liam Payne last year, so a reunion, if it is to happen, won't be the complete group. That being said, do you feel like One Direction, when it fully dissolved, because also too, Zayn left the group before they fully disbanded. Do you feel like One Direction ended at the height of its powers when they were together, or do you feel like they went out with a little bit of a whimper?
I think they ended at the height of their power for sure. I think, when Zayn left the band, it was earth-shattering, of course. Absolutely earth-shattering. But they picked themselves up and they made a hell of a record. Made in the AM was like, I kind of consider that like separate from the rest of their discography, just because its sound is so mature. It's got, I'm sure they were influenced by NSYNC, and I don't mean to discredit, the boy bands who came before them. I do think that bands like NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, they walked so One Direction could run. They definitely, One Direction would not have been the the powerhouse that they were without NSYNC. But I think all of that is shown in Made in the AM. I think you can really see that they grew from their experience. They all still have a solid relationship with Zayn. There was no hate there. I think there was definitely tension that they had to probably deal with, but it wasn't reflected in the album. I think they showed their maturity, their growth as a unit, and also those who inspired them and how they got to that point. And I think, truth be told, I still am a little hurt that they broke up after that they announced their hiatus. I think they still had at least one or two great albums left in them. But I definitely do not think that they went out on a whimper or any sort of a low note. I think they were at the height of their power for sure.
We'll see a reunion one day. It'll happen. I'm optimistic. It's going to take Harry Styles' solo star power dwindling a little bit, which doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. But before it's all said and done, I think they'll get back together one more time. Steven, I feel like I already answered the question for you because, NSYNC, like I said, at the height of its stardom, felt like so small compared to any of these other boy bands, especially One Direction, which dominated the whole 2010s. But do you feel like NSYNC went out at the height of its powers?
Oh, for sure. I mean, they could have put out probably like 3 or 4 more albums and really just kept doing it. But I think we were left with a really tight collection of work and like a legacy cementing discography. Like they put out their first record in 1997, as I said, and they put out I guess you could call it their 4th album in 2001. It was Celebrity. It was their final record, but they put out like a Christmas album in between, which, by the way, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, perennial banger. And so I think, they managed to make a massive impact with 3 records, we'll say. If they kept going, who knows where it would have gone? It probably would have petered out like they all do. Like Backstreet Boys obviously had the advantage of continuing on, and they petered out too. That's the cycle of boy bands. Like they come and go as their audiences age out. It's literally a science. So I think what we were left with only bolsters their legacy. They never had the downslide. They just sort of broke off. Obviously, Justin was the only one who really made a huge career for himself. But in this discography, we watched them go from boys to men. We literally grew up with them over this arc. Like the first album, they're like young, strapping men who are doing their dance moves. And by the time you get to Celebrity, they're like hunks, for lack of a better word. And so you sort of see how they shape-shifted and grew in such a short period of time. And I think that is like it's just so poetic to see it end that way.
We got an unintentional boys to men mention on this podcast.
I didn't even hear myself say that.
Yeah, maybe perk up. Well, guys, that's going to do it for the debate. But before we get out of here, we need to hear some closing statements. Bow tie it all together. Lacey, you got 1 minute to tell me why One Direction is the greatest of all time.
On top of all of what I said before, I'm going to throw in my curveball. They did so much more for the LGBTQ movement than any other boy band could have possibly done. Every single girl who loved Louis Styles, queer now, all of them. And I think One Direction aided in their self-acceptance. I would not have come to terms with my own sexuality and been able to feel comfortable being myself without my love of Louis Tomlinson and One Direction as a whole. And to a similar token, they had male fans and they played into it. They joked around with their sexuality. They didn't let it limit them. They flirted with each other. They even kissed each other every once in a while. And I think that on top of their musical merits and everything that they did with their music videos and their albums and their cultural appearances within and without the music industry, I think all of that together makes them, they're unmatched. There's nothing like One Direction.
A curveball to close us out. Steven, you got 60 seconds left to tell us why NSYNC is the greatest boy band of all time.
Well, not to denigrate anything you said, I totally agree with everything you said about One Direction, but Lance Bass is openly gay. I just want to point that out. Just it's
give you
of
that
no
one. You can have
consequence.
that one.
Well, I will say NSYNC was a gay awakening for an entire generation, so there is that too. But I think taking a look at what they did, and not to end on like a contentious note, but like again, there wouldn't be a One Direction without NSYNC, and NSYNC is really just like the gold standard for what a boy band can be. I think measuring up to that's very difficult. I think One Direction did in a lot of ways, but I think, you know, NSYNC's just everything I've said, the fact that they have time to have their legacy grow, their songs to become even more woven into the cultural fabric, the fact that all five guys are still relevant after all these years in their own way, like Chris Kirkpatrick notwithstanding, just goes to show that like they made such an incredible impact that we continue to feel.
Well argued, ladies and gentlemen. Well argued. Lance Bass, I ran into him at a gay bar in Austin, Texas earlier this year. And I was like, Lance Bass, what are you doing here? And what's funny too is I love boy bands so much, and I'm a straight male, and that confuses a lot of people. I'm like, yeah, it's my jam. I went to Big Time Rush earlier this year, and they were like, and you paid how much for tickets to be that close to Dancing Men? I'm like, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. In fact, I'm doing it again next February because I love Big Time Rush that much. That would have been my pick. I would have brought Big Time Rush to the table. It would have been tough to argue with both of you because not necessarily selling out stadiums, but man, did they do some well ratings for Nickelodeon, and their reunion tour right now is kind of killing it.
I have heard good things about the reunion tour.
Go into the Big Time Rush catalog if you're unfamiliar. Also, shout out Why Don't We? It was mentioned at the top. Gone too soon. Had such great potential. Just I didn't think the industry ever got behind them. But some of them are doing some good solo stuff right now. Here's hoping we get some more Why Don't We in the future. And also The Wanted. I feel like we're giving all our flowers to all these great boy bands. I feel like it's endgame right now. They're all coming out of the portals. We're just like, look at them. Great stuff. 5 Seconds of Summer going on tour again next year. Boy bands are kind of having a moment in 2025, 2026 and beyond. Boy bands might be back. I feel like we've said that every 5 years for the past couple decades, but boy bands might be back.
This time you mean it.
If you disagree with Steven and Lacey's picks for greatest boy band of all time, head on over to ScreenRant.com, or if you're listening to this podcast in Lacey's article right now, scroll down to the comments and let us know your selections. If you give a well thought out argument, we will read it on the show next week. That's what I'm about to do right now with best horror movie. We have one comment from King of Horror, who appropriately had to be read on this one, says, sorry, but the most important horror film and likely the greatest is The Exorcist. Either way, Jaws is better than Aliens or The Exorcist. So bringing two to the table here, two classics that were not argued on last week's show. Shout out King of Horror. We also have one from Dr. Talos, who says, for me, the original Dawn of the Dead from 1978, I like its unrelenting nature. I also love cosmic horror, and I think I like The Thing just a little bit more than Alien. They are both excellent. Pandorum is pretty sweet. I also like Event Horizon. We got so many selections here from Dr. Talos. Really good spooky movie throughout, As Above, So Below. Movie I find immersive, but not everyone seems to be as spellbound while viewing. Lots of great picks from Dr. Talos. Thank you for bringing those to the table. Speaking of next week, in terms of what we're covering on next week's show, we're going to crown the best TV show of all time. A very broad topic compared to boy bands, where we got to get a little bit more niche and have a little bit more honed in selections. Best TV show. We go in drama, we go in comedy, we go in sitcom, we go in limited series, we go in anthology. Who knows where we go with that one? I'm excited to be in this chair once again, moderating that journey. Guys, Steven, Lacey, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Saying your names back to back is funny to me because I had a theater director. Once again, adding more lore to my confusing, I'm not gay, but I have a lot of gay anecdotes from my past. I did theater in high school, and one of my directors was named Stephen Lacey. So saying your names back to back is so funny.
There's also Steve Lacey, the artist, the R&B artist, Steve Lacey.
Wow. So many, geez, all these connections that are happening right now. Lacey, thank you for your time today. Where can the people find you, and what do you got going on at ScreenRant?
Yeah, people can find me at ScreenRant. I am working on a ton of cool music stuff, lots of cool interviews. I just talked to Logic a couple weeks ago about his new movie. Great guy, great movie. So lots of cool stuff on ScreenRant. And then everything else I'm doing can be found at Lacey Cohen Writer on Instagram. My name, writer, Instagram.
Amazing. Bobby Tarantino in the flesh coming to ScreenRant. I'm excited for that one. Steven, thank you so much for your time. What you got cooking over on Variety, and where can the people find you?
Yeah, find me at Variety. Just look at my byline, Stephen J. Horowitz, and I'm on socials. My handle across everything is Spiried is what it sort of spells out to. So yeah, come check it out.
Amazing. Lots of good stuff to look forward to. I like talking about music on a microphone. It's such a breath of fresh air for me. So deep in the weeds with film and TV. I feel so energized talking with you guys about boy bands. I'm going to go queue up my playlist right now. Thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you next week.